What a great turnout for Louise Penny. There aren't many mystery writers or authors of any sort who can draw the size of an audience these days. Her popularity and the evident enthusiasm and continued support by so many fans like yourselves are testament to Louise's standing as one of the most accomplished mystery writers practicing the craft today. Now, many of you no doubt know Louise's own story, how she came to her career as an author somewhat serendipitously, working initially as a journalist and radio host for the Canadian Broadcast Company. After 18 years in journalism, she quit at the age of 35, thinking she'd write a great historical novel, but then suffered 5 years of writer's block, binging on gummy bears and Oprah reruns. One day, as she recalls it, she looked at her bedside table, brimming with books by Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers, and had the epiphany that the detective genre was her calling. The character of Armand Gamache, Chief Inspector of the Sûreté du Québec, soon arrived in her imagination, and her first novel, Still Life, appeared 14 years ago. Her newest book, A Better Man, is the 15th in the series. So if you do the math, you'll realize she's been turning out novels at the rate of one a year and winning lots and lots of honors along the way. What's distinguished the series is not just its compelling, often quirky cast of characters, out of the way setting and in the fictional village of Three Pines, and references to the history of Louise's, historical references to the history of Louise's native Canada, but the focus on the why of the crimes as much or more than the how. Louise's own experiences living through some dark times, coping with loneliness, self-hatred, and alcoholism, which she did years ago, afforded firsthand glimpses into the kinds of emotions that may drive some people to criminal action. But having since enjoyed much happiness and success, Louise has spoken of her profound belief that goodness exists in the world. Indeed, a New York Times profile of Louise last year described her as an unfailingly cheery detective writer who nonetheless is a ruthless killer. I am a killing machine, but a happy one, she was quoted in the Times as saying. I get all my resentments out in my books. As Louise says in the acknowledgments of A Better Man, her books are essentially about community, about love and belonging, about the great gift of friendship. And now she's about to, well, not give the whole story away, but maybe give a few hints about what happens to Gamache and your other favorite folks in Three Pines when, with floodwaters rising across the province, a distraught father appears pleading for help in finding his daughter. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Louise Penny.
Coming out, and this is the debut. You are the first ones. Thank you. I am so pleased to be celebrating this with you and the pub date for A Better Man, which has been a long time coming. As I don't know if any of you follow me on Facebook. Some of you do, so you saw me lying on A Better Man the other day. What I would love to do, actually, before we get too far into this, I would love to take a photograph of all of you. So get to it. This is partly for my publisher to prove that I actually did show up. All right, just a sec. Here we go. I took a selfie. You know what? I might try a selfie. But now I actually do want to get a picture of you guys because you're so attractive, so much more attractive than the other audiences I have. And then later, I want to take a picture of you with Rosa, who I've decided to take Rosa on tour with me. It was an odd sort of thing. I was having a bubble bath the other day. And you know how you get used to your surroundings? You no longer really notice what's happening? Well, I don't know about you, but it's certainly the case with me. Then I'd had any number of bubble baths in this particular bath, and I suddenly looked up over the bubbles and said, there's a duck. There's a duck on the side of the tub. Must have been there for years, never noticed it. So then I thought, well, that's got to be Rosa. So I decided to bring her with me on tour. I'm taking different pictures. We'll have Rosa being frisked at security tomorrow. Rosa on the plane and so on. And right now, Rosa is here. I want to thank Brad and Brittany and everybody else from Politics and Prose. You are so fortunate to have one of the great independents in the world, not just in this country, in the world. So thank you. And as he said, you know, it's always such a shock. If you could see yourselves from where I'm standing, it is extraordinary. And nobody expects to walk out, certainly no author expects to walk out and see so many people unrelated to them. Because I have to tell you, when I first started, I'd wanted to be a writer since the age of 8. So I had essentially 40 years, because the first book came out when I was in my mid-40s. I had about 40 years to imagine what a book tour would be like. So I'd written the book, and I'll go back to how that happened, but I finally wrote the end, which is an amazing thing to feel, that you've actually finished the book. But then I didn't actually know how to get it published. So I went to my local independent bookstore, and I said to the clerk, "You will never guess what has happened. I have finished my first book." And she said, "Oh my God, that is fabulous. Congratulations. Would you like to buy another one?" Her name was Jennifer. To say, if I was getting into being an author because my ego was demanding it, that was a shot right across the bow. But I finally finished it, and I actually, found a publisher and blah, and I'll go into some more detail. But I do want to tell you about the first book tour, which is why it's so extraordinary to stand here and see all of you. Still Life was about to come out. It was about 2 weeks before, and I had been, again, in bubble baths, practicing my Oprah interview, which I'm sure was imminent. Oh, good question, Oprah. Oh. We would become best friends. She would fly me around, and then I'd finally have to unfriend her because she's very clingy. But I hadn't heard from the publisher yet. So finally, but I wasn't worried because I know that private jets and penthouse suites, they take time to organize. Chauffeurs. So about 2 weeks, 10 days before the book came out, I called him up and I said, "Mr. Martin, I am ready for my tour." And he said, "Who is this?" And I said, "Louise Penny." And he said, "No, we're not going to send you on tour because it's your debut, and nobody's read the book, nobody knows who you are, and nobody wants to see you." Well, no, exactly. That did not sound right to me. So when I got off the phone, I said to my husband, Michael, we should take the entire advance for Still Life, and with it, we will buy lunch. And over lunch, we will discuss sending me on tour and pay for it ourselves. And God bless the man. He said, "That's a great idea. We'll do that." So we went to McDonald's and we organized the whole thing. So I went to any place that would have me. We did all over North America, we went. And you know what? The publisher was right. There were times I counted who was in the audience, and it came to 0. But that wasn't so bad. I mean, humiliation aside, and is it really humiliation if there's no one there to witness it? And you can always, Michael and I could always sort of pretend that this was all part of the long-range plan. It's falling in exactly as we had hoped. I mean, who really wants readers on a book tour anyway? And we would get to go for dinner early. The problem came when one person showed up, right? And she's sitting right where you're sitting. Yes, hello again. Looking very nice, smiling, and she's beautiful. But then she realizes she's all alone. And you know that moment, because I'm standing here, and she's sitting there, and there's not a sound behind her, so But she can't leave. Because she's already there. She's sitting down. I'm up here. And frankly, we both wish she would just drop dead. So I wish I could stand here and say that that was my first book tour. It was essentially my first 3 book tours, which now I can look back and laugh. At the time, it genuinely was not all that funny. Because you just wonder, am I ever going to get traction? Is it ever going to happen? Is anyone going to start reading the books? And I know some of you started very, very early, and some of you, God bless you, have come on afterward and helped with the word of mouth. But boy, those first few years were a grind. So no part of me walks out here today, and I mean this sincerely, and takes any of you in any of these seats for granted. And I am deeply grateful to you for coming out tonight, for supporting the series, for spreading the word about Armand and Reine-Marie and all of the others. And I have a very clear sense that while Three Pines is a village not on any map, it's only ever found by people lost who are meant to find it, I feel the same way about the books, that we are a community, all of us, that those of you who are here who are meant to find the books did. And so there's a special connection, I feel, to all of you. I simply wrote, with Still Life and the subsequent books, a book I wanted to read. And if anyone else wanted to join me, God bless them. And you're the ones who wanted to join me. So we're all in this together. And I have a very, because I am a reader, obviously, as well, I know that reading is as creative as writing, that it takes both, that I steer and you paddle, but it takes both of us to get to where we're going to go. I get the royalties. So thank you very much for that. But what I'd love to do is talk a little bit, not that I'm not already, about how the books came to be, how I came to be a writer, and then open it up for questions, because frankly for me that's the most interesting part. It's the most dynamic, to hear what your questions are. So again, we're a team, we're in this together. What I want to do is tell you a little bit about where the series came from, and it came from my own experiences. As I said, I wanted to write since I was 8, and I could tell you exactly when. And I know you're thinking, oh my God, she's going back to when she's like 60. This is gonna be a really long evening, and we can't leave. But fortunately for you, it is a riveting story. So there I was 8, and I was a lonely child, and it was something that I put on myself. I was never excluded. I was never made to feel lonely. I came out of the womb just afraid. Now I've gone even further. Now I'm a fetus, right? This is not going. And then I'm going to start talking about past lives. So get comfortable. But I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of the dark, not unusual. I was afraid of too much sunlight. I was afraid of heights. I was afraid of holes. I was hugely afraid of other children. I was afraid of adults. I was just afraid of everything. Probably my cardinal fear was spiders, which again is not unusual, but I think it probably bordered on a phobia for me. My favorite place to be, because I was such a fearful child, again, I was so fortunate that I was never given a reason to be afraid. I was brought up by a very loving family. However, I did feel I was adopted, but then I think many people are. My real mother, the Queen, still hasn't come for me. I had a crush on Prince Charles, which once I looked at the Mendel table was a little confusing. But I was 8 and I was in my room, because that's where I wanted to be. It was the only place I felt safe, I felt sovereign. The only place I felt really comfortable and happy in my own skin was sitting on my bed reading. And to be honest, it is still my favorite place in the world today, is in my bedroom, on the bed, reading a book. Michael used to call me a horizontalist. Spend the whole day just trying to get my feet up on something. So there I was. It got so bad that when I was naughty as a child, which wasn't often, but it did happen every now and then, as punishment, my mother would send me outside to play. I was reading in my room Charlotte's Web. Now, it's possible I was a slightly slow child, because I think I was about halfway through Charlotte's Web before I realized that Charlotte was a spider. Now, to be fair to my 8-year-old self, I don't think I was quite that thick. But what happened in that instant was life-changing, literally life-changing. I can feel still the nubbly bedspread underneath me. Because what happened in that instant was that I realized I loved Charlotte. I loved the spider, and I wanted nothing bad to happen to her. And to this day, I don't love spiders, but I will not harm them. And for a child whose entire day was prescribed by the least fearful thing to do, to have the most fearful thing lifted in that instant was magic. It was power beyond imagining. And I understood that the magic emanated from the story, from the book. It was contained between the covers. And from that moment on, I knew I would be a lifelong reader. If it was that powerful, what else could storytelling do? What else could books give me? But if reading was that powerful, how wonderful must writing be? So I pledged at that moment I would become a writer. Now, of course, reading Charlotte's Web, my fear of spiders was lifted, to be immediately replaced by a fear of writing. So I didn't write at all. Well, I wrote what I had to write, but I wasn't one of those children who wrote stories all the time. Not as a teenager, not even into my 20s. I seriously was afraid of failing. I was afraid of trying the one thing I know I was put on this earth to do, in case I was wrong, in case it turned out that I couldn't do it. So I took an ancillary course and I became a journalist. And that was a godsend as well, because I got to listen to people, I got to travel, got to interview people, I got to hear the most extraordinary stories, got to hear stories of such rage, the rage some people have. I don't need to tell you about some of the rage that is floating around, free-floating in the world today, not just here, but everywhere. Except for that kiss between Melania and Trudeau. But I also got to hear some extraordinary moments, and that more than, I couldn't tell you right now any exact instances of anger, but I can tell you a moment of forgiveness that will never leave me. I was talking to a mother. There was a trial, murder trial on, and I was interviewing the mother of the victim. The victim was a little girl. And she said in the course of the interview, I didn't ask because it would never occur to me to ask, but she volunteered that she had forgiven the person who had done this, which wasn't to say that she ever wanted to see him again, that she wanted to sit down for dinner with him, that she wanted to be friends. She made the clear distinction between forgiveness and friendship, but that she had let that go because she had to. She had to get on with her life. She had to forgive it. And I remember staring at her. I can see her now in front of me in awe that I should be of the same species as someone who is capable of that. And I could see that it was genuine. It was so inspiring. And that's what I try to bring to the books. Not these extraordinary acts, because we can't really relate to such extraordinary acts, but the fact that it is possible. This forgiveness is possible, that goodness exists, that hope, the thing at the bottom of Pandora's box, exists. Those have all inspired the books, and they're thanks to the journalism. So the fact that I actually lived with these great fears actually ended up to be a great blessing, because without them, the books as they are right now wouldn't exist. I finally, I was covering Quebec politics, and we had a referendum, the second one on Quebec sovereignty. You're probably somewhat familiar with Quebec politics. And it came so close, and I was doing the national coverage the night of the vote. So I was live on air, and we had been warned by the no side, which was the federalist side, which were the people who wanted Quebec to stay in Canada. The head of the no side got in touch with us and said, we're going to lose, and Quebec is going to separate, which was a bit of a blow, of course. I mean, as a journalist, I should have been impartial, but the fact is, as an Anglo-Quebecer, I cared very deeply about this. But we went on and we did the coverage, and it turned out that the no side won, but by the slimmest of margins, that nobody felt like there was a winner. Everybody felt shattered. Everybody came out of that bruised. And I just staggered along after that. I was just exhausted by our politics. And I know. Can you believe it? I'm standing in Washington saying that Canadian politics brought me to my knees. I'm very weak. But Michael, again, God bless him, I came home one day and he said, you know, if you would like, I know you always wanted to write a book. If you want to quit work in order to write that book, he said the most beautiful thing. It was almost as great as the first time he said, I love you. Not quite as wonderful as that. Nothing ever could be. But he said, if you want to quit work, I'll support you. Isn't that beautiful? Thank God he meant financially. So I quit work. And then, as Brad said, immediately suffered 5 years of writer's block. 5. You know, 3 would have been enough. 5 years. It got to the stage where Michael was afraid when he'd come home from work to ask me how the book was going. You know you're in trouble. It was like my mother when I hit 35 and I wasn't married yet, and she had stopped asking me about, have you met any nice men lately? Any women? Any farm animals interested? Anything? So she stopped asking, and Michael stopped asking about the book. But then, as a journalist, I realized when you cover events, and most of them, of course, as a journalist, are often tragic, and you do the postmortem afterward, at the immediate moment of the event, it appears to come out of the blue. But then once you start looking and deconstructing what happened, you realize it is actually a cascade of smaller events, often smaller, often easily overlooked events that had to happen, often in the order in which they happened, in order for the larger thing to come about. But the same is true of wonderful things. And I look back at what actually brought me here today, standing in front of you, and broke that writer's block. And it was a series of apparently unrelated events. One was that Michael and I moved out of the city into a small village some of you might recognize. I hate it when my publisher or journalists come. Well, I mean, I like it when they come to visit, but I know that they then realize that I have no imagination. So we moved into this village, and then I fell in with a group of women. We call ourselves Les Girls. We get together once a month, and they're all creative. They're dancers and poets and artists and sculptors and musicians, and they're just incredibly creative and bold women. And they talk about the process, and they asked me to join them, and I had to say, you know, I'm not actually writing anything. And they said, well, do you consider yourself a writer? And I thought that was a really good question, and it really gave me pause. And I finally came to them and I said, yes, I do. And they said, that's good, because nobody else gets to define who you are. If you feel you're a writer, even if for your entire life you never put a word on paper, you are still a writer. You get to decide. So we got together, and I got to listen to them talk about what they're working on and the fact that it is a process. For some reason, I thought I had to get it right from the get-go, that from the moment I sat down, the first word on the paper had to be perfect right to the last word. And if it wasn't, that meant that there was something wrong with the story, and certainly something wrong with me. So I was paralyzed. I was paralyzed with fear. They taught me that you can't get it right the first time. You shouldn't get it right the first time. It's a process. The painter goes back and overpaints and sometimes tosses it away and then moves on to the next one, using that as a building block, as a learning tool, and moving on and building on it until they get to where they need to be. The last thing that happened was, and this is so prosaic, I know you won't tell anyone because it's embarrassing. Again, I was lying in bed reading, or actually about to read, and I looked over onto the bedside table, the nightstand, and there was a pile of books. And like probably most of you, I read small c Catholically. I read fiction and nonfiction and poetry and cookbooks and biography, but very well represented was crime fiction. And I had, again, one of those moments that my good friend Oprah, we've never actually met. She's very sad about that. But that she would call an aha moment. And a couple of things came together at that moment. Probably the most profound that stayed with me was I understood then what a role and what a tyranny the approval of others had been in my life. That was part of what was paralyzing me. It wasn't so much the fear of failure as the fear of not being approved of people not liking what I was writing, particularly my mother, my brothers, my teachers, my former colleagues, for sure. I mean, anyone, strangers on the street, they mattered more to me than my actual writing. The woman who voices my GPS. Recalculating. And I understood then that if I was going to get to where I needed to be in this world, I had to set that aside. I had to not care about what others thought about me. I had to simply write a book I would read. Me. Nobody, not worry about what anybody else thought, not worry about whether it was even published. That the contract with my 8-year-old self wasn't that it be published, wasn't that it even be any good. just that it be written. So I went straight down, and I understood then what I wanted to write was a crime novel, crime fiction, because I love reading crime fiction. Just read a book that write a book I would love to read. I went down to the kitchen table and drew out a map of Three Pines. Now I have to say that the other thing that really inspired me was 9/11. I started writing shortly after 9/11, and I know that it wasn't a coincidence. And I'm not going to stand here and say that as a Canadian I was in any way as profoundly affected by it as any of you. But it affected the whole world. And I think one of the ways it affected everybody, all of humanity, was the sense that no place is safe. That you can be going around doing perfectly innocent and something dreadful happens. And we see it time and again too with the shootings. You just don't know. You don't know when something bad is going to happen. So I wanted, and I was feeling like the rest of you, very vulnerable. Even though I'm living in a small village, you can't help how you feel. So I wanted to create a place that would be safe. Clearly not physically safe. Because I got that wrong. But that wasn't the point. What makes Three Pines a safe place? Because that was the lesson, I think, there were so many of them that came out of 9/11 and the heroism. But one of the lessons is that no place is safe. You cannot guarantee your physical safety. Three Pines offers emotional safety. It offers spiritual safety. And it offers it because of the sense of community, of belonging, that when dreadful things happen, you're not alone. How powerful is that? You're not alone. That's what I wanted to create with Three Pines. And I created it just for myself. But I also had a clear sense that if I feel something, there's a pretty good chance other people do. I am right in the middle of the bell curve. There's nothing extraordinary about me at all. If I am wearing clothing, there's a pretty good chance everybody else is wearing exactly the same thing. If I'm looking at something that someone's wearing thinking, oh my God, that looks awful, I can guarantee you within 6 months I'm wearing it. And then another 6 months after that, it's passé. Because I'm also a bit of the, the dove in the mine shaft. If I discover something, it's like too late. So that's what I wanted to do, though, with Three Pines, was create a place with a sense of safety, a sense of belonging. As Brad referred to, the books aren't really about murder, of course. They're about friendship. They're about love in all of its forms. I mean, people ask about Rosa, the duck. And I think it's often used in reviews in a slightly disparaging way, the mad poet and her duck. And I think that's often done by people who aren't reading the books very deeply. The duck, Rosa, is an allegory. I mean, most of Three Pines is an allegory. But the duck came about because, as proof, or as a reflection of love in all of its forms, whether it is a man and a woman, whether it is Gamache and Beauvoir, the father-son, the mentor-mentee relationship, which is really the love relationship at the center of these books, whether it is man for man, woman for woman, the animals, whether it's a lonely old poet and her duck. The duck is a symbol of love. That's what Rosa is. She's got quite a mouth on her as well. Not the lover I would choose. So that's really what I wanted to create. And I created a village I would choose to live in. I created characters I would choose as friends, because I didn't think the books would be published. I thought the only reward I was going to get was in the writing of it, which would take a couple of years, and in fact it did. And then it came time to choose the main character, and I had heard that Christie had grown weary of Poirot. And I thought, now how do I, in case the books really are published and they become a series and I live with it for the rest of my life, I don't want to get tired of my main character. So how do I mitigate against that? And something that occurred to me was I thought, I will just create a man I would marry. And so that's what I did. And I was feeling very proud of myself. And I went downstairs to breakfast one day, and there was Michael talking about world peace or something like that. And I thought, damn, I didn't create Gamache, I transcribed the man. I did try to convince him that he was Ruth, but he was having none of that. What I'd love to do now is open it up for questions. You've been very patient with me prattling on. I'd love to open it up for questions. I think that there are microphones at the front there. The only thing I would ask is that you not give anything away in the books, because, the books are so intertwined at this stage that the character development issues are as much spoilers as the plot. So if you could maybe try to be careful in, I'm thinking that maybe just a series of compliments. The safest. Let's start over here.
What makes you so fabulous? No. I grew up in the Toronto area, and so I'm sure you get this question so much when you do these tours in Canada, but, being out of Canada for a long time, I'm curious as to why you as an Anglophone chose the Francophone as your main character, and especially since I'm also of the age to remember when there was actually martial law in Canada.
Right, and people were being killed, kidnapped and murdered.
Right.
Bombs were going off in Quebec.
Yeah. And I guess just related to that, do you get any pushback from the French Canadians about, who is this Anglophone?
Who is this Anglophone, zut alors?
Yeah.
And why she's got such a bad French accent? Did she put more effort in? That's an interesting question. Honestly, it is perplexing to me as well. I consider myself strong, independent, feminist. I have no idea why I've chosen my main character as not only Francophone, but a man. I honestly I cannot explain how that happened. I think the only thing that comes close to that is that he is inspired by Michael. And I think that was, that desire to reflect Michael in the books and all that I admire about him. But there are many, many, many women I admire who I could have put in. So maybe the next series. To be honest with you, before I started writing the books, when I was first designing them, I actually thought the main characters would be Clara and Peter. Yeah, and that it would be a sort of an update, a reimagining of the Nick and Nora Charles. Because I love the Dashiell Hammett books. But once Gamache appeared, it was just so clear that that's who had to take over the series. So it's an interesting, and I haven't had I am so fortunate. I am so happy about that. It would break my heart if my Francophone neighbors resented what I was writing about. And in fact, I get kind of the opposite, even though there's some joking about them. But there's a lot of joking, especially from Jean-Guy, about the Anglophones in Quebec. So I think we get it from both sides. I'm just a little worried if anyone in the Sûreté ever starts reading the books. I'm now very careful to go the speed limit. Yes.
Hi. You're wonderful.
Oh, now I feel bad, but I will accept that. Thank you.
We heard Amar Tolles tell us that he spends 2 years outlining his books before he ever starts writing. We heard Celeste Ng tell us that she starts writing and characters appear suddenly that she didn't even know were going to be in the book. Could you describe more about how you develop the stories in your writing?
Right. At the beginning, particularly with Still Life, and probably for the first 3 or 4, I did a lot of outlining because I realized part of the writer's block was that I did sit down at a blank screen and think, and nothing happened. That I hadn't given it really enough thought about what I wanted to write and why, and plot and characters and development. So I did a lot of that, and I probably had to. I think it wasn't a crutch. I think it was actually a tool. As I've gotten more confident and gotten to know the characters more, I do less of that, though I do spend a year walking around before I start with a book with a notebook. And it's split into different sections. There's characters, there's quotes, there's plot, atmosphere, there's sort of miscellaneous. Writing down notes. It becomes a little bit like a pointillist painting in that there's just, disparate sometimes dots appear. Sometimes it's words, sometimes it's a bit of poetry. And over the course of the year, something comes together so that I know then what it is I want to write about, the themes, where I want. Generally, I know now a few books ahead where I want the main characters to be going. But for me, it's always, it's a struggle, and it's one I'm not sure I always get right before I start a book or even in the process. That balance of having a good enough sense of where the book is going, the plots and the themes. The books aren't, as we've said over and over, about murder. Murder is an act, it's not a theme. It would not interest me at all to spend an entire year thinking about murder. I don't think about murder, I think about life, I think about the consequences and the themes. But as a result, it has to be something interesting enough for me to spend, that's all I do in a whole year. I don't write short stories, I don't write another series, I don't write essays, I write a book. Every day, I don't take a day off. Every day I get up and I write the book. So it has to be something that I find compelling. So over the course of the year, as I approach the first day of writing, I'm just picking up these bits and pieces. I would say probably 60% of which is not going to be used in that book, maybe in future books. But then I know when it comes together that I've reached that stage where now I'm dying to write because I know enough of what I want to say, where the characters are going to go, what the themes, what the plot is going to be. But like a pointillist, there has to be space in between the dots. There has to be, I can't hold on to it too tightly because then there would be no space for inspiration, for the unexpected. So that's that balance, the struggle that I have between structure and space for inspiration.
I'm trying to figure out how to keep this simple. And here it comes. I've loved you from the beginning. It's that simple.
Thank you.
I sent you an email. Within 2 hours, I got an email back from you.
Oh.
Then, now I hear from Lise, but I'm very happy with that. The point is, I wrote to you.
Lise is another fiction. I've just created her. She doesn't exist. No.
I wrote to you because I was so impressed with your humanity. I'm a therapist, and I said, as a therapist, I am so conscious of how you love your people. And in my life and in my work, it is about friendship, it is about helping people connect, it is about love. And that's what I saw in your writing from day one.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you. I often think one of the great gifts that I've been given in my life is that sort of the more, I'm going to use a profanity, so someone who doesn't want to hear it, cover your ears. The more fucked up you are, the better writer you are. If you can come through the other side, because what it teaches you, of course, is compassion and connection with others. And that quote that the young agent said to Gamache that he carries with him, that we are strongest where we're broken. I believe that. Yes.
Hi, so I also love everything about your books, but one thing I wanted to ask was, I love getting to learn about things like quintuplets and the eighth muse and cartography. And I was wondering where those devices come from, if you keep a file of things that interest you, how deeply you research those topics before you incorporate them?
That's an interesting question. Sometimes they're a bit of a surprise to me. I am not sure that cartography was going to play as big a role in how the light gets in as it ended up playing. And the same with the Champlain was always going to be, that was always going to be in Bury Your Dead, the centerpiece of the thing. But some of the issues of the Battle of the Plains of Abraham and what happened between Wolfe and Montcalm, that was a bit of a surprise as well. The trick is the telling detail. It's to know what to keep in and what to take out. Because there is a tendency, if you know it, and you spent a long time researching it, and it is now a tax deduction, that really it should be in the book, because someone might ask about it at some stage. Why did you go to Holland? But to not put too much in. So yeah, I was never good in school. I got straight C's. I was 60s, and at no stage did any teacher ever say to my mother, "Do you know, if Louise only worked harder, she would be better." I am sorry, Mrs. Penny, but your daughter is working flat out. Thank God your two sons are smart. It's always, it interests me. We're talking about it over drinks this afternoon before coming here, that we're talking about my editor's young son, who's 16, and I was thinking, at 13, 14, 15, 16, nobody would have ever predicted that I'd be up here. There's a great quote from the wife of one of our prime ministers, Mrs. Pearson, who famously said that behind every successful man there stands a surprised woman. I think behind me there's like this whole mob of surprised people. I think over here.
From one Louise to another, you're doing a heck of a job.
Thank you, Louise.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about your use of First Nations. That being the thing that has driven Gamache out and back. And I was just very interested in why that seems to roll through each one of your books.
Well, not all of them, but in many of them. You're absolutely right. The First Nations, the Aboriginal community. As a journalist, I covered a lot of that. In Quebec, there was they flooded a lot of the First Nations land up in James Bay in order to power the white communities south, and it was devastating to the Native community, and we covered it. And then the Native community started having blockades and holding people at rifle point, and the government's going, now where did this come from? Well, what do you mean? You steal their children, you put them in residential schools, you beat the language out of them. Then you take what little land you've actually given them in the middle of nowhere and you flood it, and you're surprised. So I think, that sort of atrocity, I think, has hurt me, and because I happen to have given birth to Armand, it hurts him too. That one scene in, I believe it was in Bury Your Dead, where he meets a native elder who's come down from the Cree territories, and she's protesting in front of a hotel, thinking that it was the National Assembly. That actually happened, and I covered that. Went and spoke to the woman about, I'm sorry, but who are you? Why are you protesting the Chateau Frontenac? And she barely spoke English. And her community had banded together for like 6 months to try to raise the money to send this one person down to Quebec to protest. And she was so much a fish out of water, she was protesting in front of a hotel. And we put her on the air and tried to get her, but it was because the young men and women were disappearing up north and nobody cared. So that sort of thing needs to be brought into the open. And people think Canada's a wonderful, wonderful place, but I think every country has something to be ashamed of, and that is something that we need to own more. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi. I just want to say that I really appreciate your sense of humor. And I love the way it comes out in the dialogue in the books and the characters just come across as very real. And, I often wonder what it is about me that attracts me to murder mysteries. Is it something wrong with me? So to hear you say that it's not the murder, for me it's kind of the whodunit and why also. But I think you talk a lot more about friendship and love. It's often deep philosophical issues that make you think. And I really wanted to ask you about Jean Guy and why you had him go a certain direction, but you don't want us to get into that.
Thank you.
So I'm going
to. Yeah, it was just you can see I was about to.
Yes, but since you said that Gamache is based on Michael, are you Reine Marie or are you? Are you a composite of some of the other characters? Because everybody says, you write based on your life experience.
Yes, no, I wish I could say, to be honest, I am partly, for sure. Their relationship is very much the type of relationship Michael and I had. So that's how I can write about that. I made Reine Marie a librarian because I have such respect for librarians. And thank you. Oh my gosh. But I think I started off actually as Clara.
Oh.
Yeah, that sort of insecurity at times, but also with enough determination to do what I needed to do in my own way. But then being pretty sure I got it wrong. So, the 4 o'clock in the morning terrors. I'm not quite as messy as Clara. I rarely have banana in my hair, but it does sometimes happen. But I think I am a bit of everyone. Probably least, I think, Ruth. But she and I do share a certain delusion, so maybe I am Ruth. So I think you're right. I think I am actually probably a lot of who they are. It's quite a challenge writing Armand, because it's something to write someone who is actually smarter than I am and a better person than I am. So I wear a bracelet actually here, and it says, what would Gamache do? We actually sell it and raise money for dementia research around the world. But also, it does help me be a better person, I'm embarrassed to admit. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Louise, could you share with us, please, your interest in dementia?
Oh,
where that comes from?
Yes, and I'm so pleased that that we're raising money tonight. Are you involved in that organization at all?
No, but my husband died of a neurodegenerative disease.
I'm sorry. How long ago was that?
10 years ago.
Oh, gosh. Oh, you must have been young, and he must have been young, too. I'm so sorry. That's painful. That's one of the things I've learned. Michael
Not that
didn't...
young.
Not that young.
Not that young.
Well, that's one of the things I've learned in this, because Michael wasn't young. Michael was 20 or so years older than me. He was 82 when he died.
So was Peter.
Oh, is that right? So you married an older man as well. Oh, we should sit down. But what a blessing, actually, you know, it's a terrible thing, obviously, to have someone you love diagnosed with dementia. Michael was a doctor, the head of hematology at the Montréal Children's. He was a lead investigator into childhood leukemia around the world. He would come into the States and he would run trials, wrote papers. He would tell me that when he started treating children with leukemia, 80% of them would die. By the time he was finished, 80% survived, which not simply because of his research, but he certainly contributed to it. He is an extraordinary man with a great, great mind. But he was eventually diagnosed. And of course, looking back on it, you think, oh, I should have seen the signs. I should have seen when he couldn't count, that, you know, he had difficulty with that bill, but, you know, you just think, oh, well, that's just natural. We all have difficulty sometimes. I've since learned that because they do this test, this psychosocial test, to try to figure out, you know, where are you on the scale? Well, Michael tested absolutely normal. But what they didn't realize is he actually started pretty high. He dropped to normal, which is, you know, I know if I ever get dementia, it's going to be like, right? So that's my interest. We were within the realm of it being awful. We were about as lucky as you could get because, well, first of all, it wasn't early onset. So he was already in his late 70s. So while it was a personal tragedy, it wasn't tragic overall. He was always a gentle soul. He just became gentler and happier and kinder. He'd just smile all day long. And I was younger. I worked from home. We had the financial resources for the support. And we lived in a small community where everybody helped. They came over. If Michael fell, I had all sorts of people who could come over and help me get him back up. We had every advantage, and it still shattered me. I don't know how people do it. I don't know how most of people who get dementia have partners who either have no partners or who have partners who are the same age. It is such a thief, dementia, which is why it's so important for me to try to not only raise awareness. When Michael was diagnosed, he made it clear that, first of all, he wasn't ashamed of it. He wasn't embarrassed about it. He wanted to talk about it because it was going to be clear. But also he wanted me to talk about it as well. Because he didn't want to be treated like the mad uncle in the attic. So that's why it's important for me to go out to raise money, and raise money for caregivers as well, for respite care, because if the caregiver goes down, nothing good happens. So that's my interest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here too.
A year ago, when you did your last book tour, I sent an email and I said, why are you not coming anywhere near DC or Baltimore? And so I think it's personally my responsibility. I love your characters. I find them to be so well drawn and so human. And like probably most of the people in this audience, I have a secret love affair with Gamache. But the one character who breaks my heart in every one of your books is Ruth. I don't know, I just wanted to know why Ruth.
Why Ruth? Ruth was, when I created the characters, and again, I didn't think the books would be published, but when I created the characters, I realized I had a slight problem because I did want the books to be published. I'd read enough books to realize that my problem was that everybody was fairly well balanced and quite nice. that we needed a counterpoint. We needed a kind of a Greek chorus in the village. And so I looked around to our acquaintances. There are two of them. Ruth is inspired by two people. They of course, don't see it. They all think that they're Reine-Marie or Clara. In fact, I was at a party not all that long ago, and one of the Ruths was there, and someone with a very low survival instinct went up to her to say, "Aren't you Ruth?" Absolutely, while denying it, proving the point. So that's how Ruth started. But I always knew that I wanted her to also be a poet, because we all have a saving grace. And Ruth's saving grace, among several of them, is a self-awareness. She is aware. She's simply born inside out. You know, the books, are about, one of the things they're about is duality. The duality, the gap between what we are thinking and what we say, between the public face and our inner emotions, between the beautiful village and what's happening behind closed doors. And most of us, fortunately, have the public visage. We have the facade. We're taught early how to do that. And then thank God we do, actually. So we keep our more rancid thoughts inside, whereas Ruth is the opposite. She has all of her rancid thoughts outside, and she keeps her goodness hidden. Partly, and this was the story, and I won't go into it too long, but how Rosa came to be born. Because Ruth has become convinced through her life, that line, "Who hurt you once so far beyond repair," that everything she loves and cares about, she ends up hurting. And that was proven with Rosa's sister. So that's where Ruth comes from. Thank you. Let's take just these two, and then is that? Oh no, and you, yes.
I've seen the film of Still Life and wasn't really thrilled with the choices made. My friends and I argue constantly over who would be the best actor to play Gamache.
Oh.
My choice is Trevor Eve, who was in the BBC TV series Waking Dead. Do you have a choice that you would like to see play Gamache?
Well, most of them are dead now, or have to appear in the ashtrays.
Trevor's still alive.
Trevor, is he? How old is he? You see, that's part of the issue, is that many of the actors who I think would be great are now sort of into their 60s.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you're going to have a series, I mean, you want them to be age appropriate, but you also want them to be able to, go on for 10 years. But I'll look him up. Trevor Eves? Good. I initially thought, you probably don't even know who this guy is, Kieran Hines? Does anyone know? Is that right? You thought? Yeah, but now he's in his 60s as well. So, anyway, these filmmakers. I was also disappointed with what happened with the film. So I'm now, it's my own fault because I'm saying no to everything at this stage. So it would have to be an extraordinary offer from a really fine company for me to say yes. Yes, for yours.
A question about Ruth and her poetry is, it seems like after this many books, you might have a little tiny book of just Ruth's poetry. Because my sisters and I go, wow, we could collect it up and have a Ruth book.
Well, I don't write her poetry. It's not mine. If you look at the front of every book, there's acknowledgments, and some is from a self-published book by a poet who unfortunately passed away before the book was put out. It was put out by a friend of hers, and he knew how much I loved poetry, so he gave me, this was before I was writing, this slim volume of her works. Marilyn Plessner is her name. And I was so taken with that's where the line, "Who hurt you once so far beyond repair," comes from. But most of her other poetry is Margaret Atwood. Yeah. It's a wonderful poet. It's all from a book of hers called Morning in the Burned House. Pretty grim. You know, and you wonder why poetry isn't more popular. Morning in the Burned House. But the poetry inside is glorious. It's wonderful. And it's all done, of course, with her permission, because you don't want to piss off Margaret Atwood. Last question.
Hi. I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about, moving to the place that you based Three Pines off of. And I'm also a big Thomas Wolfe fan, and thinking about You Can't Go Home Again, things like that. I was just wondering how you kind of gain the courage to write about your own experiences, knowing that those also involve so many other people, kind of the good and the bad, and how you kind of make those decisions and how you gain that confidence.
No, I don't think I can talk about that. Because I fictionalize it, I honestly don't worry about taking bits and pieces of my experience and other people's experience, because for the most part it's fairly universal. I have never taken anything negative about someone else. Most of what I do write about is fictional. So it was really, the big thing I had to overcome was the fear of what my neighbors would think of the book itself. Some see themselves in it. Most are happy, some aren't. But, I know in my heart that there was nothing that was done maliciously, and I know that for sure. So it didn't take much courage on my part. Again, it's probably delusion. Thank you for your question. Thank you all so much for coming out and celebrating. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Oh.